morning here in Hampshire. I'm going to ask now for the webcast to be started, and we'll just wait for Katie to confirm that it has started.
Okay, we've started, Chairman.
Thank you, Katie. Well, again, thank you everyone for attending this virtual meeting of the Hampshire Pension Fund Responsible Investment Subcommittee. This meeting is being webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. All decisions at today's meeting will be reached through a vote. I will call for the vote at the appropriate time under each item, with the vote and outcome read audibly by the Democratic Support Officer. I'm going to start by reading the names of the members of the subcommittee so that they can confirm their attendance for the public record. Members, please unmute and confirm your attendance when your name is called so that we can ensure you can be heard. So I'll start with myself, Councillor Mark Kemp-G. Councillor Tom Thacker.
Present, Chairman.
And thank you, Vice Chairman. Councillor Andrew Joy.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bruce Tennant.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. Councillor Cal Corkery.
Present, Chair.
Thank you, Cal. And Mr. Neil Wood.
Present, Chair.
Good morning, Neil.
Morning, Chair.
Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence, and no apologies have been received. Item 2, declarations of interest. This is the standard declaration of interest. So members, if you have any declaration on any items to be discussed on today's agenda, could you declare it now or at the appropriate time? Thank you, members. Yes, who's that?
I'm not sure if it's a declarable item, but I know the deputy, Richard Mulrine. He's a resident in my community.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that's fantastic. Thank you for letting us know. Item 3 on the agenda is confirmation of the non-exempt minutes of our meeting held on the 20th of October 2020. And I'm just going to go through those minutes, if I may, page by page. I'm going to use the page numbering in the pack of papers on our screens. So page 5, page 6, and page 7, and page 8.
Chairman, I've not followed your numbering. There is an item on paragraph 11.
Paragraph 11, yep. Let me get
and the actual name is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and that's actually mentioned in a later item anyway. Have I got the wrong agenda item?
I was just going through the minutes of the last meeting, which started at page agenda item 3, Councillor Thacker.
I'm going to have to find my notes again. Agenda, I beg your pardon. I've run ahead of myself. I do apologise, Chairman. I thought what I said was in the minutes, but it's in an agenda item. I do apologise.
That's all right. It's fine. That's fine. I know it's not always easy to get the right screen number. So, members, may I take it that those minutes are a true and fair record of our meeting on the 20th of October? Would that be...
Councillor Joy, I'm unable to do so because I was not present at that meeting, although I was a member of the committee.
Okay, well, thanks for letting us know that, but you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. So moving on, members, item 4 is deputations, and we have a deputation this morning from Richard Mulrine on behalf of the Hampshire Pension Fund Divest Group, speaking in relation to items 6 and 8. Good morning, Mr. Mel Ryan, and you have 10 minutes to deliver your deputation.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Councillors. I am a Hampshire Pension Fund Scheme member, having worked for Eastleigh Borough Council for 26 years, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. On behalf of HPF Divest, I want to draw your attention to a report released on February the 23rd of this year by Platform and Friends of the Earth, which sets out the compelling case for pension fund divestment from fossil fuels. I quote from and paraphrase the report this morning. It also details the fossil fuel investments of the Hampshire Pension Fund to the end of the 2019-20 financial year. This is information that local campaigners had previously been unable to obtain via 3 separate Freedom of Information requests, having been told repeatedly that no such figures existed. Needless to say, this has been hugely frustrating for members of the pension fund and the wider public who care deeply about the climate emergency, which Hampshire County Council has declared its intention to tackle. The figure given in the report for Hampshire Pension Fund's fossil fuel investments is £136.1 million, which puts the HPF in the top quartile of fossil fuel investors in the country. However, calculations by Transition Economics for Platform London in November 2020 showed that the value of oil company shares owned by UK public pension funds has fallen by more than £1.75 billion in less than 4 years. Hampshire Pension Fund suffered the seventh largest loss of £68.4 million between 2017 and 2020. This could be a sign of things to come. Mark Campanale, founder and executive chairman of Carbon Tracker, an independent financial think tank, says in the report, the biggest economic disruption of our modern era will be the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. This is a historic event that is unfolding rapidly, as renewables are now cheaper in most, if not all, parts of the world. The conclusion is clear. In times of rapid, disruptive innovation, incumbent defending dominant market shares are almost never safe. This argument has evolved rapidly in the last decade because of the plummeting price of cleaner technologies, mirrored by the collapsing returns to investors in the fossil fuel industry. As of 2018, the asset value of pension funds around the world represented roughly 51% of global GDP, with just 20 pension funds representing 9% of that. Of this estimated £36.5 trillion, 98% belongs to pension funds in OECD countries. However, the impact of these investments, in particular in fossil fuel assets that accelerate climate change, is primarily felt by populations in the global south outside OECD countries. Pension funds and the fossil fuel assets they own play a significant part in accelerating climate change and continue to create profit from the legacy of colonialism and inequality they emerge from. So, there is clearly an important moral debate that we shouldn't burn this stuff. But now, because of the competitiveness of clean technology, it has also become a financial debate, which says, actually, there are cheaper, more efficient technologies out there, so we won't burn this stuff. The moment that the price of an electric vehicle is comparable to that of an internal combustion engine car, we enter a new paradigm, a world of falling demand for fossil fuels. This then plays out in sector after sector, country after country. Peak demand for fossil fuels was reached in the OECD in 2005. Peak coal was in 2013, and we saw global peak oil demand and peak fossil fuel demand in 2019-20. And yet, the oil and gas sector is still planning for growth. But as cheaper renewable energy takes the demand for overall energy growth, this leads to overcapacity and stranded assets in the oil and gas industry. It faces lower volume and lower prices, meaning lower profits for fossil fuel companies, lower returns for investors, and losses for local authority pension fund beneficiaries. Financial markets know this, which is why we have seen the collapse in the valuations of the fossil fuel sector, followed by write-downs. In the last year alone, the global oil sector has written down $100 billion of assets. We understand that ESG issues are now a theme in all of your meetings, that the Hampshire Pension Fund has appointed a responsible investment advisor, and that the Access Pool has recently appointed an ESG consultant at Minerva, who are part of the Transition Pathways Initiative. We very much welcome these developments, which we hope will embed environmental considerations into every investment decision taken by the fund, and also welcome the shift of your passive fund and one managed fund into lower carbon alternatives. However, you must move farther and faster. In 2020, the Transition Pathways Initiative assessed 125 oil and gas producers, coal companies and electricity groups on their preparedness for a lower carbon economy. They found that no major oil, gas or coal company is on track to align their business with the Paris climate goal of limiting global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees C by 2050. Fund manager engagement alone will not change this, as it rarely results in a shareholder resolution to alter the course of the business that the asset is held in. Engagement as a negotiating position is meaningless without an explicit threat that you may withdraw your funds, which requires having a policy to divest. The argument for engagement instead of divestment tends to be made by asset owners who employ investment managers who won't or can't accept that there is a technology-driven transition occurring. This is like arguing, we're long-term shareholders in Blockbuster, the video rental store. We don't divest. We'll engage with them to adapt to the threat posed by this new disruptor called Netflix, who rent videos by post. As this engagement proceeds over the years, Blockbuster goes bust as people stop renting physical DVDs, while the share prices of Netflix and others run away with themselves because they got on board with the technology shift to low-cost live streaming as it emerged. Therefore, the approach of we'll decarbonise when the markets decide to decarbonise is clearly not a risk management strategy. It's a do nothing and hope a few meetings will help strategy. Meaningful action on climate change requires a commitment to ending the expansion and extraction of fossil fuels. So the decision to end fossil fuel investments must be taken now as a priority. And this brief must be given to consultants, advisors and investment managers working on behalf of HPF and the Access Pool. However, this is not just an ESG issue, it is a classic risk issue, because the transition is fundamentally disrupting markets in a way only comparable to the rise of the internet. The Bank of England has said that in the UK, up to £16 trillion of assets could be wiped out if the climate emergency is not addressed effectively. As Mark Carney, the former governor of the bank, has said, the longer the adjustment is delayed in the real economy, the greater risk that there is a sharp adjustment, including perhaps the bursting of the carbon bubble. It's therefore worth remembering that a 2016 legal opinion for Client Earth from two leading QCs found that pension fund trustees who fail to consider climate risk could be exposing themselves to future legal challenges for failing to protect the long-term interest of their members. I note that the report to be considered under item 6 says that correspondence to date on investments that relate to climate change has been received from a very small minority of the nearly 179,000 scheme members. However, you should also note that a 2020 poll revealed that the UK public wants a radical response to climate change with the same urgency as the response to the COVID-19 crisis, because after all, scheme members are part of the UK public. These investments are not only perpetuating present-day global inequalities, but are also not funding a future worth scheme members retiring into. Members of the public and the pension fund will hold you accountable in elections for your decisions on these investments and the losses they have already caused. Last but not least, we note that the Hampshire Pension Fund banks with NatWest, which itself has invested over $12 billion in fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement. We suggest that a conscious choice to bank ethically would go hand in hand with the decision to end fossil fuel investments. This report contains references for all the research and figures I have quoted. I urge you to read it and act on its recommendations. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mulryan, for your deputation. I think actually that concludes item 4 for the time being. And we now move on to item 5, which is Chairman's announcements. 3 announcements from me. First of all, I thought members, you might be interested to know that we've been doing some research and putting together our historical record as a pension fund panel and board of our moves in our responsible investment agenda. And believe it or not, it's nearly 3 years ago that the Pension Fund Panel and Board agreed to form a working party to review our responsible investment policy. And I have to say, we did that significantly before, if I may say so, the County Council started its plans to declare a climate emergency. I think there were 3 of us at that time who were involved with this, because in November 2018, the Responsible Investment Working Group of the Pension Fund Panel and Board, if you remember, took advice from Dr. Rupert Younger, who I had fortuitously met at a meeting of fellow alumni from my old university. Rupert Younger, as some of you will know, was a former High Sheriff of Hampshire and was Professor of Business Implementation at the Side Business School in Oxford, at Oxford University, and also chair of the Oxford University SRI Committee, where he was charged with coordinating the responsible investment policies of all the Oxford colleges. And once I knew he'd managed to achieve that, I thought he was certainly worthy of coming to talk to us. And indeed, much of what he did has been very useful to me as I chair the Access LGPS pool as well, as you know. In April 2019, we consulted widely on our updated version of our responsible investment policy, and we put a responsible investment section on the pension fund's website. We included details of it in employers' newsletter, requesting that employers publicise this consultation of the policy, the new policy, to their members. We, the County Council, posted an article on the front page of Hansnet on Yammer, and in a blog update from the Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Corporate Resources, which received quite a number of hits and views, I'm pleased to say. An email to a sample of 500 deferred scheme members that we had addresses of was sent out. Inclusion in the newsletter that accompanied the pensioners' annual pay slip, and as you know, we have getting on for 50,000 pensioners who are members. We wrote to the pension fund's investment managers to ask their views on our draft policy and shared the draft policy with other members of the Access pool. By July 2019, our improved and new RI policy had been agreed by the panel and board, and in September 19, we had the first meeting of the Pension Fund Responsible Investment Subcommittee, which of course is where we are today, meeting today. And then in September 2019, this subcommittee led the recommendation, which was adopted to the Pension Fund Panel and Board, to become a signatory of the UK Stewardship Code and agreed to join the UN Principles of Responsible Investment. In January 2020, we took training from the UN Principles of Responsible Investment experts and also from responsible investment consultants MJ Hudson Spring. In March 2020, we agreed to transfer the pension fund's passive global equity investment to a climate-aware fund, which is a substantial amount of money. And in April 2020, our first annual update on responsible investment was published, including carbon footprint data. At that time, we also appointed specialist RI consultants MJ Hudson Spring to assist the pension fund in its policies. And we agreed amendments to the RI policy based on the recommendations of MJ Hudson Spring, particularly in relation to our relationships and dealings with our fund managers, which, if you may remember, was a particular point that Dr. Younger brought out at the time. In September 20, we had a report from Hudson Spring on the quality of the pension fund managers and our responsible investment approaches, which is very much work in progress. And in November 20, we agreed to transfer one of the pension fund's active global equity portfolios to a Paris-aligned version of the strategy. And indeed, members, you'll note an item later on in the agenda which demonstrates that we intend to move further in this direction with your permission. And in December 2020, we installed GRESB ESG benchmarking into our entire investment property portfolio, which accounts for some 7 or 8% of the pensions fund 9 billion assets. And in 2020, elsewhere with our friends in Access, we have recently, as our deputy alluded to, appointed Minerva, highly regarded specialists and RI investors and advisors to the Access pool, and they are already working hard and working through future policy recommendations for the Access pool. So I think sometimes it's forgotten to what degree we've moved. I know it won't be fast enough for some people, but we want to move in a process, in a sensible way while remembering our fiduciary duties. And I hope that demonstrates our history, and it is a continuing history, is very much there. Members, my second point is to just confirm that we have, as agreed at the pension fund panel and board, sent out a round robin on substitutes for this subcommittee, and I hope you all got it and that it was all clear to you. We haven't had any apologies for absence today, so we haven't needed to use the substitutes, but I'm glad that we've sorted that out. So we will now have a smooth regime for having substitutes if necessary. Lastly, I thought you might be interested to know that we have received some communications to do with the all-party parliamentary group on pensions and their current inquiry, which is called the Just Transition Inquiry. We've been circulated to see if we would like to make submissions to this all-party parliamentary group, and we are considering that matter. We have received, as I say, correspondence encouraging us to do so, and we have sent questionnaires and details out to our investment managers, as we think to a degree this may involve, or may be more directed at our investment managers than ourselves, but we are awaiting responses from our investment managers, which we will consider. And then, as I say, we will consider with the pension fund panel members whether we will make a submission or not. So I thought you'd just like that particular update. Members, that concludes my chairman's announcements, and we now move on to item 6 on your agenda, which is...
Chairman?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Tennant has his hand raised just before we move on.
Councillor Tennant, yes.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just wondered if I could have a copy of Richard Mould Ryan's presentation, please.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have said, I think he alluded to the fact that he was going to ask us to study it. So I assume, Katie, has he sent it?
I will liaise with him, yes, and circulate it.
Okay, well, I think we'd all like to see it as well. So if we could all have it, please, that would be good. Yes,
because he mentioned a number of facts in his presentation, which I would like to know what to investigate further.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you very much for that. Moving on, members, to item 6 on the agenda, which is scheme member communications and annual responsible investment update for scheme members. And I'm going to ask Rob Sarfas to introduce this item. Thank you very much, Rob. Good morning to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. So this is just a brief report providing a summary for members on the communication to and from scheme members. So you'll be aware there have been 2 deputations to the panel and board since this subcommittee last met, and there have been also 4 pieces of correspondence that have been received all of these, the correspondence and the deputations relate to climate change. You'll also be aware that the panel and board agreed to making an allocation to the budget of £20,000 per annum in December to enhance communication with stakeholders. And we as officers have used a small amount of that budget to work with the County Council's communications and marketing teams to design the annual Responsible Investment Update report and make it more accessible to scheme members based on some of the previous feedback we've received. The draft of that update is attached as an appendix. There are a couple of minor amendments to make prior to publication that were made to the final draft, but that was after the papers had been published. So the second bullet in the top box on the second page should read, has a carbon footprint for its latest actively managed equity portfolio that is only 3% of the benchmark average for world companies. And the final bullet in that top box will be changed to say, has lower than average carbon emissions for these investments when compared with the carbon footprint and carbon intensity of companies on average based on the most relevant benchmark indices. Both the wording for both of those points has been tidied up to make it clearer to the reader. The report will be included with pensioners' annual payslips in April and also published on the Pension Fund's website. And the subcommittee is asked today to provide any comments and then give approval for the report for publication with those necessary final amendments that I have highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I also believe you've taken advice on plain English as well, which
that's right.
I know very much appreciated and was one issue I seem to recall. Members, it's a very interesting paper, I think you'll agree. Do we have questions on it?
Councillor Tennant, followed by Councillor Corkery, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm really pleased with this this document. It's something I think we should have done some time ago, but it puts it in a simpler language that I think more people will understand. However, I've got a couple of, well, one comment really. On the second page, there's a reference to GRESEB and ESG. Well, I think hopefully people know what ESG is now, but both those things I think it should say global real estate sustainability benchmark and then GRESEB in brackets, because we can't assume that the reader will understand what GRESEB is. And the same really with ESG, I would say.
Yeah, Rob, do you want to pick up on that? What do you feel about it?
Yeah, so there's a very good points. Thank you, Councillor Tennant. The ESG we did, I believe, I'm just scrolling back through the report. So in the second column on the first page, we've defined that there as ESG. The GRESB one is an interesting one. I looked at the website for GRESB, and they actually say that it no longer is an acronym for anything. It used to be the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, but where they now also incorporate infrastructure benchmarking as well, they've just decided to call themselves GRESB instead. So it doesn't technically stand for 5 letters that are spelt out anymore, but we could very well add some words to explain a bit better what that is to make it clearer to the reader.
Thank you, Rob, because in that case I think it would be good to have an asterisk or something with a footnote.
Of course.
Because if we're trying to make this more easier to understand for people, then we should go as far as we can, because I'm still, well, hopefully this is early days, because I'm still getting a lot of people coming to me about things that we were already doing, but they don't know. They're not reading it through. They don't understand. I think when they look at our reports, because of its technocratic language. So yeah, thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you for that, Councillor Tennant. Councillor Corkery.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got 2 questions, stroke points. The first one is with regards to the comparative information that's provided. So we're given the 2020 Hampshire average, 2019 Hampshire average, and then the indices weighted average, which I understand is comparing to world averages. I just wonder if we have the information available to look at what the average is for local government pensions in the UK, because it would seem to me that's a more relevant and helpful comparator. And I know that some of the research that was mentioned in the deputation that's been conducted by Platform and Friends of the Earth, it includes that information about comparing pension funds against each other. And I think ideally that's what we should be doing rather than just comparing ourselves to what the world is doing at large.
Thank you for that. Rob, do you want to respond to that point first?
It's certainly something we can take away to follow up to check for that comparison as a general comparison how we compare with stock markets, and in fact this also includes some of our bond investments. The index shows us how we're performing and that we are doing better at the moment than stock markets in general, but we can certainly look into whether it would be helpful to include something on other LGPS funds if that data is available.
I think it would be very interesting, actually. And I tell you, we sort of compare our investment performance against other LGPS funds. I say sort of because it is notoriously difficult to get like for likes, actually, because it tends to go on the size of the funds from year to year. And of course, things change. Like we had our advanced contributions, 3 years contributions, which obviously artificially enhance the value of our pension fund for that one reason. So it's not always easy, but I think, this is a very sensible idea, actually. I'd be personally very interested to know how we were doing against the peer group. So let's explore that one, shall we?
Thank you.
Councillor Corker, you had other points, I think.
Yeah, I've got one other one, and that's with regards to how we are asking people to submit their views on these matters. So I know there's a kind of a box at the back page near the bottom which asks people to send in their thoughts by email or by post. Now, my experience of asking people to submit information in that way is that you're not likely to get very much, and what you do can be of varying format and quality. I wonder if it's worth us looking at setting up a survey and instead asking people to respond to a survey, because A, I think that is more likely people there are to respond to that, and B, then we can structure the survey in such a way that gives us useful data and information that we can compare and analyse. And I also wonder if it's worth putting more prominence on that request within the report or within the document that we're sending out. So rather than it being kind of on the back page near the bottom where maybe only people who read the whole document will get to, maybe it could be put kind of nearer the top of the front page just to try and grab people's attention and encourage maximum possible engagement.
Right. We have a response on that. Rob, would you like to respond to it, or Carolyn perhaps, or?
I think they're very sensible suggestions. Really happy to move the contact onto the front page. I think you're right. We really do struggle to get people to engage with us on this topic. So let's give that a try and see if that helps. In terms of survey, if you don't mind, because of the time criticality of getting this information out, if we can leave the current contact in there as part of the whole communication strategy, if we can pick up the use of surveys, snap surveys, etc., moving forward, if that's acceptable.
Yep. Thank you for that. Councillor Joy.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, having listened to colleagues' thoughts about sort of comparisons and the like, I think one's got to be slightly careful about this because it's very easy to get too granular or focused on things which are directly in front of us rather than the overall picture. So where, for example, we talk about, say, comparisons between pension schemes on that table on the second page, clearly we don't want to actually have a sort of a clutter of information because people then tend to sort of skim past it. But I think the important thing here is to sort of get enough information there so that one can actually have a perspective rather than a comparison of sort of the minor components. Pension schemes clearly are huge players in this, but we're not the biggest players. So, for example, when we talk about a climate emergency, individual councils doing, undertaking that or committing to it is one thing, but actually it's the impact on the country and the world that actually matters. Yes, we do things and we make comparisons at our own granular level, but it's the overall impact. So I think it would be something to think about in terms of the amount of information and the granularity and the grade of information that we put in front of people. And I'm sure that will be thought about. And when it comes to a survey, the challenge there is to make sure that you're actually getting informed responses as opposed to responses from those who've really only had time to look at headlines rather than the detail beneath it. So that's a challenge to get it right. And it's just plainly an observation rather than sort of an objection or a contrasting opinion to colleagues.
I think that's a good point. I mean, at some stage, I'd quite like a sort of informal working party type environment where we could start looking at statistics generally in this area. And I think we'd include all that in that, because we have to be careful that we are what I would describe as gifted amateurs in this field. We're not professionals, and there are a lot of conflicting statistics buzzing around, as we know, and I think it would be helpful if we could sit down together at some stage and sort out what type of statistics we felt were meaningful, and which we could rely on, if you like, in terms of our reporting function. But thank you for that. That's carefully noted. Mr. Wood, you had a point, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, sorry, my raise hand function doesn't seem to be available on this computer. I'm sat somewhere else today. But just quickly, picking up a little bit, I'm obviously fully supportive of the document and think it is something that does provide some valuable information to members of the fund. Just the reference to it going on the council's website, is there communication sent out to all employers to say that this is now available, that we can pass on to sort of active and deferred members? Because obviously this is included in the pensioner payslip, and all the communications down at the bottom are sort of guided towards Dr. Allen, the pensioners representative. Obviously, I'm not trying to create work for myself particularly, but if something's going out to employers, then that should generate active member interest sort of via me.
Rob, do you want to pick up on that?
Sure, thank you, Chairman. So we've produced two versions of the document. The version you're seeing has Dr. Allen's reference email address at the bottom. There's a separate version that doesn't have that included, which is the one that we will publish on the website. And we can certainly speak to our colleagues in pension services team to get a link to that document shared with employers if that would be helpful. I think it's more difficult to reach the deferred members, but any help employers could give with sharing it with active members, I'm sure would be very greatly appreciated.
Sorry, Chairman. Just yes, that would be fine. Obviously, we get a reasonable amount of communications through to pass on to members, which obviously I'm more than happy to do that anyway, sort of through my employer. So yeah, anything like that would be great that we could pass on, just to in some ways generate some more interest in it. Certainly, I think Dr. Allen has lots of correspondence from pensioners, but say on my side it is quite quiet on that side, and say obviously not trying to generate work for myself, but it is quite noticeable how quiet it is on that thing. So it might be that people are just not picking up on it. So any help that we can get, or we can get and we can give, would be useful.
Absolutely. Carolyn, can I address a question to you? In terms of, these sorts of good housekeeping points on communication policy, to what degree is that going to be swept up in the budget for that we've devoted to this, and have we got a sort of an implementation policy for, better communications?
Yes, completely. All of these points are extremely relevant and very helpful and will be fully picked up as part of the current development of that communication strategy that colleagues are working on. I think it's fair to say they've already made some progress, but we will bring back that strategy and the action plan in early course so that we can make sure that we are taking forward as many avenues of encouraging contact and communication as possible.
Okay, thank you for that. Members, a good debate, some interesting points, some good action points that I think are highly relevant to take forward. And any other points, or can I turn, if you will, to the recommendation, which is on page 9, and at para 2, the recommendation says that the subcommittee approves the annual update on responsible investment activities to be published to scheme members. And I'm going to call for a poll on that, and Democratic Services is going to conduct an electronic poll. So if you get your voting fingers ready, we'll give it a whirl.
Thank you, Chairman. That one's just hopefully just popped up on the screens. And obviously, as Rob confirmed, this recommendation does include the minor changes as well.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, members. I think we've pretty well all voted. I think we have all voted, and we've got 100% in favour of that recommendation. So thank you very much for that. There's one other relevant recommendation, that the communication to and from scheme members on responsible investment issues is noted. And would you be happy to note that as well, members, for us? Thank you very much indeed. That is noted. And we now move on to agenda item 7, which is shareholding voting highlight reports. And I'm very pleased to say that Gemma Farley is going to introduce this paper for us. Gemma.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. So this report provides information regarding the pension fund's equity investment managers' engagement with the management of the companies the pension fund invests in, including how the investment managers have voted on behalf of the fund during the period July to December 2020. As a minimum, all of the pension fund's investment managers are expected to engage with invested companies on areas of concerns related to ESG issues and to also exercise voting rights, particularly with regard to ESG factors, in a manner that will most favourably impact the economic value of the investments. Paragraphs 12 to 20 of this report provide examples of how the fund's active investment managers have engaged with the management of the companies the fund is invested in. How votes are cast by the pension fund will be determined by the voting policy, which for Hampshire varies depending on how the equity investment is held. Directly held equities were voted in accordance with Hampshire's voting policy, which is part of its responsible investment policy. Following the transition of Acadian's portfolio and Baillie Gifford's Global Alpha portfolio to Access in November and December 2020, the fund now has no directly held equities. Equities directly held in the Access pool will be voted in accordance with Access's voting guidelines, which were agreed by the Joint Committee. Equities in pooled funds of external investment managers will be voted in accordance with the investment manager's voting policy, which applies to all holdings within the fund. As a result of the pension fund's policy, there is a risk that investment managers could cast their votes differently for the same resolution, and examples of this are described in paragraph 24 onwards. However, the fund believes its current policy remains the best approach, as it enables the investment managers to cast votes in line with the portfolio investment strategy that led to holding the stock. In order for the RI subcommittee to scrutinise the voting activity for the pension fund's investments, a summary of voting highlights for the period July to December 2020 is contained in Appendix 1. The highlight report does not attempt to quantify the number of votes cast by the fund's investment managers, but focuses on providing examples of the types of issues where investment managers have voted against company management, resolutions of fellow shareholders, or on sensitive or topical issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Gemma. And I must say, I thought some of the examples were extremely interesting as well. So it's a well thought out paper. Thank you very much. Members, questions or point? Councillor Thacker.
Thank you, Chairman. I looked at the page on voting record on the website. I've noticed that there's nothing later than August 2020 on the site. Now, I don't know if that's something to do with COVID or whatever, but Arcadian, for example, reports monthly looking at this, and Bailey Gifford reports 3 monthly or quarterly. And so I'm just wondering, does it need to come before the subcommittee before being published? So I just wondered if we could get some kind of regular updates that are timely, please.
Apologies, Councillor Thacker. The website is in the process of being updated. I do apologise that it's not currently up to date, but it's definitely in the process.
Well spotted, Councillor Thacker. Thank you, Gemma. Good answer too. Members, Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I thank Gemma for bringing this to our attention, because I hadn't thought about it before, but it's quite interesting that we've got different fund managers responding or voting in different ways. Yeah. So, Gemma, am I right in what you said, that, or did I hear correctly, or did I understand correctly? It was saying that you feel that it's best to leave it as it is, that they should vote in whichever way that they feel right with respect to the investment they're making on our behalf.
So that's what the panel and board and I believe the RI subcommittee agreed to when agreeing the responsible investment policy. Okay,
I must have forgotten that. The other question that I have, when I was reading through, so on page 19, paragraph 20, talks about additionally when HPQ adopted a poison pill. I can't remember, what's poison pill?
So a poison, I had to Google this as well because I didn't understand it either. It is basically a way of making your company look unattractive to being taken over.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
There are various ways you can do that as well, but we won't dwell on that. Councillor...
I don't think we need an asterisk on that, do we, Chairman?
Councillor Corkery.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma, for the report. There's a few lines within this report that kind of red flags, I guess, for me in terms of how money is being invested and concerns about particular companies. I mean, things like workers' rights, health and safety, injury in the workplace are all quite serious issues. And I appreciate that the report speaks to how the funds managers are looking at these issues and hoping to take action on them. I'm just curious how we, as a responsible investment committee and the board more generally, monitor these particular issues on an ongoing basis. Now, I appreciate they're kind of mentioned in passing here, but going forwards, how will we know that they've been actioned, if that makes sense?
Right, who would like to volunteer to answer that? Gemma, would you, or Carolyn, perhaps? I don't know, but...
Nope. 2 seconds.
Oh, Andrew's got his hand up.
Sorry.
I'm happy to start if that's okay, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Yes, I couldn't get my mic off there. Yes, on you go.
So I think there's a couple of things in play here. So firstly, we agreed that we would get a cycle through of the pension funds investment managers to the subcommittee, specifically to pick up on RI matters. And we've got Acadian presenting to this panel, albeit on a specific matter, but also to talk on their wider approach to ESG. So there is the opportunity, if any specific things that are highlighted in the report for members to address with them today. Equally, members could task officers with following up specific points with the investment managers, and we can report back at a later meeting. As hopefully members are aware, although the investment managers come once a year to the panel and board, officers are meeting with them more frequently, addressing a whole range of investment issues, but including ESG and the implementation of Hampshire's policy. And so we do have these conversations. It is addressed, but if there are specific points that the members want to hear, we can bring that back.
I think also, Andrew, at the time that we agreed the aspects that the fund managers must take into account as regards ESG in investment decisions and voting, we require them to keep on top of that. You'll see any significant issues in the report, but actually if there are any significant issues, they're required to report that to us and pick that up. So they have got a duty in that respect, Andrew, as opposed to us having to chase them. They are required to notify us. And if helpful, we can look at when we last reminded them, but it's probably when we sent the policy from the decision of this subcommittee, Andrew. So it's probably quite recently, but nothing to stop us doing a reminder if that's helpful.
Well, I think that's absolutely the right answer, if I may say so, because, you know, the managers are aware that we've signed the UK Stewardship Code and the UN PRI, so they will know that these are absolutely, you know, solid planks of signing those accords. And there's a whole lot of others, you know, there's child labour and slavery and, you know, and so on and so on. All these things we would expect, obviously, our fund managers to be very alive to and alert to, and certainly to follow our wishes in this area. So it's almost more like a Hudson Spring, you know, type thread, if you ask me, Carolyn, really, because they have been following it through with our fund managers to see that they are, you know, adhering to our policies on these issues.
Absolutely.
So, you know, we must ensure that is the case, as indeed we think it is. Councillor Corkery, was that helpful? And do you have any other points?
Yeah, it was helpful. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm still a little bit unsure about how we, as of this committee or the board generally, will actively monitor this particular issues that have been raised. I mean, yeah, so I mean the Arcadian sections, paragraphs 13 and 14, talks about specific firms where disclosure was lacking in their view. How will we know in future that has been either improved or that we've taken action perhaps to disinvest those funds because they are still lacking in disclosure? I'm just wondering if we perhaps need some kind of register that lists particular concerns or risks that we can then use to monitor over time to ensure that progress is being made, and if not, take appropriate action.
Chairman, the expectation as set out to the fund managers is that they will provide that update in their next report. So in those two examples, in the next report, either the matter will have been satisfactorily addressed, or they'll be working on it, or it will have become critical, in which case they'll be looking at whether they disinvest. So our expectation is that this is almost a running commentary, if you like. As I say, happy to take this away and make sure that we've made the responsibilities and duties crystal clear to the fund managers. I understand completely the point you're making, but there is a huge number of points being brought forward from the fund managers, and the last thing we would want to do is employ an army to keep on top of that. I'd rather we make sure that the fund managers take their duties and responsibilities seriously as we require them to do so, if that's acceptable.
Okay, yeah, if I just come back very quickly to, yeah, I appreciate that we don't want to create another layer of kind of unnecessary perhaps bureaucracy and extra work when people have already got a lot of other stuff to do. Yeah, I guess the point I'm making is just how we can be assured that we're keeping on top of the issues and ensuring that things are actioned that need to be. I take the point that future reports will hopefully reflect on those. It might be worth, having a quick look in future reports, almost providing that kind of history then to say, look, this was an issue that was previously raised, here is what has changed since, or here's what hasn't changed, just to give us some idea of the kind of timeline of things.
Councillor Corkery, if acceptable, if we can take this away and bring a report to the next RI committee highlighting the manner in which we are aiming to address that, because again, your point's well made, but again, I would want to make it clear to the fund managers we expect them to highlight that rather than me employing additional staff to go through and pick that out, because you certainly wouldn't want us to be doing that and charging the employers for more. And you're right, it would simply be bureaucracy. So I would be loath to do that. But your points are well made. And if we can bring a report back identifying the manner in which we're making sure that the fund managers are addressing those so that it comes to your attention from them in this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other hands? I can't see any.
We have Neil Wood has his hand raised, Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Neil. I didn't see you. Mr. Wood, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, not actually raised, but yeah, just in the text in there. I don't want to dwell on the point that's just been made, and I support what Carolyn's saying. I just wonder if there's a way of, if you take page 30 of the report, in the appendix, there's a couple of resolutions that were voted against. Certainly sort of the 51 job, the Aberdeen Standard, where is it possible, or is it worth to other people think actually saying, if there was a vote against, was the vote carried either for or against? So we've got particular points on there about a candidate was not considered independent, or a board where there's no female directors, that we voted against, or the fund managers have voted against it, but we don't know the outcome of that vote. So just another line in there. It's only should be small, hopefully, but just to say, although they voted against, was the motion carried, or did others vote against it?
Again, we'll wrap that into our review of being clear with fund managers on expectations. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Thank you, Carolyn.
That's right. We can we can improve the way the fund managers report to us, looking backwards and looking forwards, and embellishing the reports. Okay, thank you for that, members. I'm going to take you now to the recommendation on page 15, and it is that the Pension Fund RI Subcommittee notes how the pension fund investment managers have voted the shares in the fund's portfolios and engaged with the management of these companies as highlighted in the report. Members, are you happy to note that with all the comments made? Are you happy to note that report?
Duly noted, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on, members. Item 8 this morning is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TFCD as it's known as. And Andrew, I think you're going to speak to this report.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the TCFD reporting was an initiative of the Financial Stability Board with the aim of getting private companies and investors to consistently report on climate change related risks. This reporting is being increasingly mandated for pension funds. So there was a Department for Work and Pensions consultation last year proposing bringing this in a gradual way for large private company pension funds. And the LGA have indicated that although the DWLP initiative doesn't cover local government pension scheme, they anticipate that the Ministry of Housing and Local Government would be following suit in fairly short order. This reporting is also increasingly aligned to the UNPRI, which Hampshire has signed up to and will be shortly doing its first annual report for, and therefore a number of these responses we would have had to have made for the UNPRI. So therefore, it's recommended that Hampshire uses and produces this draft report in a final form in order to get ahead of what would be being legislated and brought in through international standard as well, and follow the good practice of a small number of other local government pension schemes who are reporting in this way already, and indeed we're following the lead of. So hopefully that's a clear summary, Chairman, but happy to take any questions.
So, Andrew, thank you. It's an excellent report. It's a very good idea. I'm very pleased to see us in the forefront of this. I don't have any particular questions. Members, the floor is yours. Any questions or points? Mr. Wood.
Not a question, Chair, but just a point. It's good to see that that we're ahead of the curve on this one. I think I attended a seminar on Wednesday for LGPS where this was one of the main talking points, and there seemed to be a lot of, although the majority are planning on something in 2021. Obviously, that didn't go into any detail, but there were a few pension funds that weren't actually planning anything. So it's just a point just to say well done to everyone. I think I'm being ahead of the curve on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Members, if there are no other points, let us move to the recommendation. In thanking you again, Andrew, for the report. Don't construe lack of questions as lack of interest, because I think this is vital work, actually, and well in line with our policy. So there we have it. We have the recommendation, and we're going to do this with a formal vote, an electronic poll. And I'll read the recommendation that the report is noted and the draft TCFD, and that stands for the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, is agreed for inclusion in the Pension Fund's annual report to be published in July 2021. Members, we are going to have a poll, and Katie has put up the polling card. If you'd like to vote, please. Thank you, members. I have all votes, 6 votes, all in favour. So I declare that recommendation carried. So thank you very much indeed. Now, item 9 is the exclusion of the press and the public, because in part to agenda we have some sensitive items, commercial interest to discuss. And members are asked to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business, as it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during this item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information within para 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and further, that in all circumstances of the cases, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information for the purposes set out in the exempt minutes. Members, would that be agreeable?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So look, to members of the public who are listening, thank you for your attendance this morning. You've been very welcome. I hope you found our proceedings of interest, and we look forward to seeing you again in due course. And now I'm going to ask for the webcast to be ended.